Welcome to Planet Evans's, also known as Geezer Gaming. Welcome to Planet Evans's somewhat late review of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 13. Since I enjoy making excuses so often, part of the reason for the delay in the release of this review, I finished the game several months ago, is that I am once again building a new gaming rig with a monster GPU in preparation for several game releases. One of which is, of course, Cyberpunk 2077. So I'm pretty excited about all that, the new rig and the release of Cyberpunk 2077. And yeah, I know. They keep delaying the release. Trust me, it will come out sooner or later, people. And you want to wait for a well-tested release. You don't want them to release it early and it to be a buggy disaster. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about all that, and time permitting, I will upload a channel announcement video, which I haven't done for a long time, featuring the new rig in all its assembled splendor and a list of its specs for anyone interested in that. And I will do some babbling about what games I'm thinking about playing coming up here for 2021. Okay, for the impatient among you, let me cut right to the too long didn't read version of the review. Now, I'm tempted to say I had a love-hate relationship with ROTTK 13, but it's a tired cliche, and it's actually not entirely accurate. I didn't hate anything about this game, but I was often frustrated by it. So I guess a love-frustration relationship, if such a thing exists, is a better way to state it. Despite this game's serious flaws, I really did enjoy playing it a lot, which I think was obvious from the recordings I uploaded. If I don't like a game, I doubt I'll be able to hide it from viewers for very long, especially not for a long Let's Play that has over 50 episodes, and I believe this Let's Play had 80 or so episodes. And I see myself playing ROTTK 13 again in the future here, but perhaps Lord Dimsum Lusum and crew will be thrown into action early on with a city to the north, rather than the mostly vacant south where I started this Let's Play. I did that in this series because I thought I would need some time to catch up with the game mechanics, and I think I was right about that. And so did other people, if their comments are any indication. But perhaps more importantly, I want to be forced into more confrontations with titans like Guan Yu and Lu Bu and Zhou Yu and all the classic officers that I got about, 30% of the officers in this Let's Play that I interacted with. There are a lot that I did not interact with, unfortunately. I don't even remember having a meeting with Liu Bei, for instance, which should happen at some point in a Romance of the Three Kingdoms gameplay. Let's do quick pros and cons lists, and then we'll get into the details for each bullet in these lists, and I'll cover some additional aspects of the game upon which I wish to elaborate, pontificate, and bloviate. So the three biggest problems, as I see it with this game, are troop supplies, you can't control non-ruler battles, and the interface. The three best things about this game as I see it are that it offered fresh challenges from previous releases, there are more weapons and treasure, which is always nice, and diplomacy is not an afterthought. It's an actual very important part of the game. Okay, so let's address each one of those bullets in a little more detail. Starting with the cons, I know I should probably do it in the pros cons order, but we're doing it the cons pros way. Supplies are crushingly important in this game. I can't tell you how many times I went into a battle and got to the point where I had my enemy cornered and was about to defeat him, and I ran out of supplies and lost the battle. Now, this may just be my own inability to discover how to do this, but I did not see any reasonable way to improve your officer's abilities to procure or increase the amount of supplies they gave to their troops. I think there was one way to do it that just the way I played the game would never have come into play, and that's if you have your troops travel through several cities, not just attack an enemy one city away, but if you were to travel several cities away to get to your enemy, there was a setting somewhere in the game that as you pass through those cities, your supplies would automatically be replenished. But that's just not how I played this game. I'm kind of a seize a city, hold on to it kind of player. There's not a lot of give and take, losing ground, gaining ground, that kind of thing with enemy officers. Either I'm being defeated and my kingdom is shrinking as a whole, or it's expanding. That's just kind of always the way I go about these games. I try to make it so I don't lose any ground. So traveling through several cities, to me, does not help. So somehow developers have to allow you to improve your ability to supply your troops. It can't be the case that as you become a more famous general, as you become higher in rank, etc., that you're still stuck with the same amount of supply limitations that you had early on as a noob officer. Something about that has to change. So that's like one of my number one gripes with this game. And sort of related to that, getting back to battles, is that when I'm not deployed for a battle as Lord Dim Sum Lusum or as the ruler, now the battle happens invisibly and AI takes over and there's number crunching and you are told what the result of the battle is. I don't enjoy playing a game that does that. I want to be able to micromanage my battles because I know that I can deploy tactics that my generals on their own won't deploy. Now, I understand what ROTTK 13 developers were going for here. They're going for a more realistic, well, a ruler can't be everywhere kind of gameplay. But that's just not enjoyable gameplay to me. I know bringing realism into it should be something that I should appreciate, but this is just a sticking point for me, these battles. All of the battles that I conduct have to be controllable by me in order for me to fully enjoy the game. Whether or not that's an affront to realism, I'm not too concerned about that. I just want to be able to control the battles because that's how I enjoy playing a game like this. And I remember past versions where I controlled all the battles regardless of whether or not my ruler was involved. And I got the option to take over the battle. So that's a sticking point for me. The interface issues. I almost don't want to get into this again because I while playing and while uploading this series, I griped enough about it, and it showed. People noticed that I was griping and they gave me grief for it, maybe rightly so. Because people may be looking for this review who haven't watched my series, I just want to address it again as quickly as possible. So there are some very counterintuitive interfaces in this game, one of which is the city's gold and supplies interface. Every time I go into that interface, I forget how you're supposed to go about it. You're supposed to drain down one city and then fuel up another city, and when you drain down the one city, it goes into this universal kitty, so to speak, and then you reapply it to the bank, the silos, the whatever in the city itself. I should just be able to transfer straight from one city to another. I don't know exactly how that interface should be designed, but it would be more intuitive. And toward the end, what got even more frustrating, I got used to that interface. I started to be able to interact with it in a less frustrating manner, in a more fluid manner. Eventually, I came to not appreciate, but understand it. But infinitely more frustrating, the more I played, was the weapons and treasure allocation interface. Because this in this game, it has to happen across many different interfaces. As a ruler, if you want to give someone, I don't know, a +2 sword or a +2 spear, what you have to do is you have to seize it from yourself, put it into the generally allocatable supply, and then award it to an officer. It's like several unnecessary steps there. And I know I'm moaning and groaning about things that I should just get over. But what would be more intuitive, what would make more sense is, as a ruler, I can just give that item straight to my officer. I don't have to seize it from myself, put it in the general supply, then reallocate it. And I didn't even discover that I could do that much till the end of the game. I think I was actually like a bonehead. I was traveling to the officer to award it through another interface. Like not even using the seize and award interface. I was using the visit and then give. And there's so many different ways to do it that it's a poorly coded feature of this game. It just needs to be, I don't need all the pomp and circumstance over giving an item to an officer. I just need to be able to do it and do it fairly quickly when I decide that I want to give that officer something. All right, so those are the big gripes that I have with the game. The biggest pros, as I see it, are that even though I consider myself a bit of an ROTTK veteran, this release did not allow me to rest on my laurels in any way, shape, or form. I could take nothing for granted from previous versions and had to learn everything all over again in order to take over China. In other words, it was a unique challenge. It was not the same old from previous releases, which I really appreciated. And I don't think I need to carry on more about that aspect of this release than that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory and covers it pretty well. Going into ROTTK 13, you have to forget all your assumptions and you have to relearn the game, which is refreshing to me, and I liked it. Another one that shouldn't take a lot of exposition is that there's a whole bunch more treasure and special weapons than in any other version I remember playing, and who could complain about more loot? That's a good thing. It's always a good thing. And the diplomacy aspect of this game is as important and I feel as interesting as the warfare part of the game. I don't think it's as ever present, at least not the way I play the game. It doesn't end up being as ever present as the battles, as warring, but it is as important. In fact, I think the most critical moment of my realm, one of my diplomatic officers saved the day for the realm. Had he not been able to win over an enemy ruler to our side, at least to give us a peace treaty for a time, I would have lost the game. So that was really nice to see. All right, those are the short lists. Let's get into a somewhat longer list of pros and cons. These are going to be more like nitpicks, and they're not really true gripes I have with the game. It's just stuff I would like to see changed, maybe in ROTTK 14, 15, whatever. And some stuff I learned to like as I played. I got used to and appreciated after a while. All right, so the nitpicks are naval battles. Naval battles in this game, they seem like an afterthought to me. I'm not a big fan of the entire battlefield when I go into a battle being water. I'm not sure what kind of sense that makes, really. In older versions, it was always the case that you were transitioning from land to sea, land to rivers, land to lakes, whatever the water features were on that particular battlefield. You had to go in and out of them to fight, and depending upon how you trained your officers and your troops, you were either more proficient in the water battles or you weren't. In fact, I think when you entered a water feature, the style of boat that you had purchased was obvious. You could see that, you had a rowboat, you had a battleship, you had, a tower ship, I think in this game they were called. It was obvious whether or not you had the right equipment to battle in a naval battle. And also you knew that if you didn't, you could get to land as quickly as possible and regain some advantage, or at least leave behind your disadvantages. And that injected more strategy into the battles, I feel. Just battling on water the whole time until you're done with a naval battle, well, it just seems like it's a land battle where you're slowly drifting and the ground's blue rather than green. It just kind of seemed cheap, and naval battles were not that important, so that's why I'm kind of relegating this to a nitpick. I got over it. There were some aspects of naval battles that were interesting, like the idea of trying to get upriver, upstream from your enemy to gain an advantage. That was kind of interesting. But strictly naval versus land battles, they need to work on that. It needs to be a mix. Another nitpick is that there were no final stats at the end of the game. Just had this sort of pat video interlude with your ruler and his spouse, and it kind of seems standard and trite. What I would have liked to have seen is to know how many officers I executed, and for me particularly, I needed to know that because as a rookie to this version of ROTTK, I came up with a few gimmicks to help me win the game. And they really weren't the right way to play the game, but because I was behind the 8-ball in a blind Let's Play, I had to do things to get ahead. And one of them was an infinite amount of executions. It's not right. It's probably not the way you should go about this game. But if I wanted to unify China, I had to do what I had to do. So what I wanted at the end of the game, I wanted a bit of an admonishment that you unified China, but you had to execute 300 officers to do it. And I would also like sort of a rating for how bloodthirsty of a ruler I was. So was I Genghis Khan? Was I Jesus of Nazareth? Whatever I was at the end, I want a rating to know how bloodthirsty I was or how peaceful I was. So something like that needs to be wrapped up at the end of the game here, not just a pre-recorded interlude video where your ruler gets injected into it. And this is probably a strange one, and if you haven't played previous versions of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, you wouldn't even know what the heck I'm talking about here, but natural disasters are missing from this version. And I missed them. Now, that's probably something weird about my own psychology. And I know most people probably think they were corny or superfluous or just outright annoying. And maybe that's why they were eliminated in this version. But in older versions, they did seem to hit certain areas of China more often. There was an intelligent AI. There was an AI behind them. Let's not be redundant here. And they had a sense to when they hit, where they hit, how bad they were. It all made sense. And you had to factor it into your takeover strategy. You knew going into certain sections of China, if you took them over, that you were going to be hit by a flood, that you were going to be hit by a typhoon, that, locusts. You were going to have locusts were going to destroy your crops, and so on. It's weird to say about disasters, but they sort of had a quaint and familiar feeling to them. You got used to them. You laughed at enemy rulers when they were hit by them, and you cursed when you got hit by them. But again, it increased the level of strategy that you had to employ to take over China. And I did miss them in this version of the game. So that's it for the nitpicks. Let's get on to the stuff that I learned to like. I may not have at first been highly enthusiastic about these things, but after a while, I started to like them and I started to understand how they increased my appreciation of the game. First of all, the stats. The stats in this game are through the roof. And there's nothing that I remember, at least in the version of the manual that I got when I initially downloaded the game, there is nothing which explains the stats in detail. So I was just lost in the sauce with the stats. And they were very dense and confusing in the beginning. But after a while, I started to understand how much of a powerful tool they were for choosing which officers were supposed to do what to improve your realm's situation, your realm's chances to take over China. So the stats, in the end, I really did like them. Battles in this game, wow, going into battles, I was totally lost as well. And like most things in this game, it took me a while to warm up to them, but they were enjoyable. Now, as watchers of my Let's Play series will know, like I mentioned in the bullet about final stats for this game, I discovered sort of an exploit, a loophole, which I took advantage of on the battlefields, and that was the bridges over the rivers. The bridges allowed me to win a lot of battles with what was probably a somewhat annoying gimmick, bordering on cheating, in most of my viewers' estimation. I don't know, nobody really brought it up. But I think if we're all being honest, what I did was cheap, to put it one way. So I think this is maybe something devs need to work on as well. In previous versions, if I recall correctly, water was not a completely insurmountable barrier. In fact, I know it wasn't in versions that I played because, again, you went from land to boat or land to sea to land again, often in one battle, where that never happens here. In this game, you just run up to a river and you can't cross it. You have to go to the bridge, and that's the only way to cross it. So it started to dawn on me that the way to avoid getting surrounded by your enemy and crushed was to put one of your strongest officers on the bridge, and it had to be a one-on-one battle from that point forward. So you were basically fighting with one enemy officer, and if you could overcome him, then the next enemy officer had to step up. In previous versions, you could use the bridge and quickly cross the water features, or your army could wade through them with a major hit to your movement. That was obviously not the case here. So I found an exploit, I found a gimmick, and I used it to my advantage. Was that fair? Probably not. Like I said, I didn't see any viewers complaining about it, but if I'm being honest, I wasn't exactly perfectly comfortable with doing it. It was just something I needed to do because my enemy kept redeploying, whereas I could not redeploy. So This is turning out to be another nitpick, but I swear, I did enjoy the battles. It's just there were certain features of them and certain ways you could take advantage of the battle system that needs to be worked on. But all in all, the battles were very enjoyable. The mini games, the duels and debates. Now, once again, going into these, I was totally lost, and I lost quite often, especially debates, and I ended up losing quite a lot of gold early on, if I remember right. But after a while, as I got used to and got better at playing these mini games, I started to like them, and I started to look forward to them. And I especially liked duels coming up during battles. I think that needed to happen more often. I like duels during battles. It's a nice change of pace from the battle engine, from the battle system, and the battlefield. And it's fun to watch, my toughest general being Dim fighting against, who knows, Zhang Lang. He fought a few Titan officers throughout this Let's Play, and it was fun to watch. It was fun to have your fictitious officer, let's say. I guess arguably they're all fictitious, but it was fun to watch your newly made officer battling or dueling against the original officers from the fables, from the legend. So they could add more of that, actually, if you ask me. And that would not have been my opinion early on. Early on, I would have said less of them. But toward the end of the Let's Play and towards the end of this series, I started to enjoy them a lot. And let me just throw in one last nitpick that came to mind as I was recording this. I'm not a real big fan of how troops are handled in this game. Preventing you from transferring them between cities was a strange development decision, in my humble opinion. Now, devs probably have their reasons for doing this. Maybe it made the game too easy to defeat if you could send troops from city to city like in previous versions. But if that's the case, that seems to be a design issue for the game as a whole. If the game is too easy without intentionally hamstringing players by taking away common sense actions and abilities they should have, well, you have to find a way to increase the difficulty of the game as a whole without depriving them of those sensible features. I'm pretty sure troops throughout history in the real world have faced transfer orders across the globe ever since the dawn of human civilization. So now, all of a sudden, making a game where their genesis and their deployment is strictly city-specific seems to violate realism and the real world, if you ask me. And it sort of smacks of a workaround to inject some artificial difficulty into the game. So I would prefer, if I'm able, to send troops around wherever I need to send them. And if that turns me into some sort of ROTTK god, well, you need to do something to make the rest of the game more difficult so that I'm not finding another cheat, so to speak. All right, everybody. Like I said, I have a great appreciation for this game, and I really enjoyed playing it. And that's probably why it seems like I'm griping so much, because I do like this game a lot, and I see where there's room for improvement to make it a really good game. And of course, if you remember, if you're one of the 3 people who's been with me since the beginning of this series, my dream game is to do a mashup, so to speak, of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 13 and Dynasty Warriors, so that you have all the strategy where you're organizing your kingdom and your officers and your diplomacy and so on. And then when you actually get to the battles, bam, it changes over to Dynasty Warriors. And now you're on the battlefield fighting with individual soldiers, with rulers, with officers, and so on. And then those numbers are tallied and you get back out into the map of China, and you get a result of the battle and whether or not you won. So sort of, strategy game and a button mashing game put together. That is my recommendation for the developers of this franchise. If you guys really want to make a game that people are going to love, and there's not going to be this mixed response, these mixed reviews for the game, if you make that game, you will have a bestseller. It will be off the charts. The ratings for it will be through the roof. People will love it. If you want to have an undeniable, inarguable fan favorite on your hands, that's where you should go with Romance of the Three Kingdoms in future versions. Just one man's opinion. Take it or leave it. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you in the next upload.
Iran has arrived.